We welcome you all to Tulsa Audubon for this month. Glad to have you here. Just a couple of some announcements on the our recorder's report. We've had two unusual birds lately. There was a trumpeter swan reported at 36 in Yale. I'm not sure exactly where that is, but somebody's reported that. And there's been a group of sandhill cranes hanging out at the 56th Street North sod farms. And they're apparently still there. So if you need sandhill cranes for Tulsa County, you can go up there and see those. Okay, so let's see. So we've got some other things coming up. February's a pretty quiet month, actually. But one thing you can do on our email newsletter, I sent information about Todd Humphrey, who's one of our members, and he's also teaches ornithology at Jenks High School. He's doing a beginning birding class with the Jenks Community Ed. And that's in April. It's on Thursday evenings and the first 3 Thursdays in April. So there's information in our email newsletter about that. And if you don't get our email newsletter, please sign up on the back. And we do that once or twice a month, and it's got updates on there and info like things like this beginning birding class. So the next thing we have is on Wednesday, March 4th, is we have an after-work birding trip at 4:30 at Ray Harrell. This is 4:30 p.m. So it's not the greatest time for birding. You know, we don't see a whole lot of stuff, but it's just a chance to get out for about an hour. We'll just walk the trails there at Ray Harrell and maybe get some wintering species that are there. And then the next day, this is a busy week actually for us, on Thursday, March 5th, Jeff Cox is doing a presentation at Hope Unitarian on interesting birds of Oklahoma. And we've got some flyers that'll be out, they're on the table out there. And anybody's welcome to come to that. It's sponsored by the Women of Hope, but anybody's welcome to come attend that. So that'll be a very interesting program. Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting. And you might learn something. And then on Friday at 12:30, there's going to be, we're having a work session out at Flycatcher Trail. If anybody's interested in helping that, it'll be from 12:30 to 3:30. And there'll be it's actually a day off of school for the high school kids, and we're going to have some high school kids out there helping. I think the Jenks Key Club is helping. So if anybody'd like to come out to Flycatcher Trail and help pull some weeds and do some yard work in our outdoor yard there that we have, please feel free to help. And Aileen, are you here? You can talk to Aileen back there for more information. We're still taking, we haven't received any applications for a birding camp scholarship, which is extremely disappointing in my mind, because it's almost up to a $1,500 scholarship to attend a national birding camp. But we have no youth birders who are interested in doing it, in Oklahoma, at least in the Tulsa area, at least that we can find. If you know of someone who's interested, it's basically teenage years, let them know, because we have this available. And it's a great, really life-changing experience if you have a young birder. And it would be for a young birder. It's not a nature camp, it's a birding camp, so they do have to have a specific interest in birds and have some knowledge of birds. They don't need to be an expert birder, but they do need to be, a birding type. It's a birding camp. So. And if you also saw back there is I brought our artwork for this year's Lesser Prairie Chicken Festival. And these are bobblehead lesser prairie chickens. I don't know if they're really lessers, but by Rusty Johnson. He's a wood carver here in Tulsa, a very, very famous wood carver. And we'll be using that as the basis for our T-shirts and poster and prints. So if anybody's interested in pre-ordering a T-shirt with those, and I can't project it here, but I'll show you a picture of the T-shirt if you're interested. This will be the last night I can take pre-orders for the shirts. We only order, basically they're mostly all pre-ordered. I'll have a few extras available at the festival, but we often will sell out, especially of the good sizes. So if you're interested in a T-shirt, if you'd like to see it, come see me. I'll show you on my phone the picture of it, and you can pre-order one if you'd like. Are there any other announcements I'm forgetting to make? If not, Cheryl will introduce our speaker.
So our speaker tonight is Kelly Bostian. who I'm sure most everyone knows is the outdoor writer for the Tulsa World. He's been doing that since August of 2008. Before he came to Tulsa, he was the managing editor, I have to read the title, for the Fairbanks Daily News Miner for about 23 years, if I can subtract correctly.
Where?
In Fairbanks, Alaska. Kelly loves everything about the outdoors. He's a great storyteller, as we learned at dinner. Writer, photographer, videographer, with a degree in journalism and mass communication, and a minor in wildlife biology and fisheries. I think you're supposed to say that the other way around, from Iowa State. Anyway, I'm going to let him tell you more about his adventures. Please welcome Kelly Bostian. Oh, and I forgot he brought whiskey with him.
Yeah, that's Whiskey over there. He's 4, he's a yellow Labrador, and he's misbehaving. But this is good training for him, because one of these days he's going to actually be a therapy dog, a crowd dog. He does a little bit of everything, because I try and make him that way. And I just realized I have a glass of water and ice in my hand and a microphone on my chest. So I'll try not to chew ice in your microphone, Ron. In case you're wondering who I really am, that's some of my personally addressed mail at the Tulsa World, the resident redneck. You get called a lot of these things. Now, as these slides go along here, I got to apologize. I had notes with these things, but I kind of lost some of them. So, well, I may be ad-libbing along the way here. But yeah, I get mail like this. I get all kinds of fun stuff. You guys send really nice mail most of the time, and I thank you for that. I do love the compliments, and I have an email folders for the good and the bad, and the good is a lot longer than the bad, I'll tell you that. Folks in Oklahoma are really nice. A lot of people think I'm from Alaska or was born there, but actually the thing is I was not born in Alaska. I was born in Iowa. I always tell people I was raised in Iowa and I grew up in Alaska. I moved to Alaska when I was 23 years old, had my kids there, had my first job there. No comments from the peanut gallery back there. Grew up in Iowa, this little place here, West Myrtle Street, in the little red box there at the corner of Highway 30 and 63, equidistant between Iowa State University and the University of Iowa. Right there in the middle of the state, between the city pool on the right and the football stadium and the high school on the left. And we had the little acreage in the middle. Actually, when I was growing up there, I grew up in the time when everything was black and white. And this was what it was. That was our 13 acres in the middle there, before everything was developed. Up there where you can see where Highway 30 was planned to go, where the yellow lines are, was where I did my first squirrel hunting and pheasant hunting, right close to the house. And this little area, all that inside the red there, was our fairground and running places when I was a kid growing up, and we did everything there. That's where I saw my first birds and discovered insects and dug at stuff and chased squirrels and climbed trees and did all that stuff kids are supposed to do, and ran to the timber there and grazed. Over here on the end was a horse pasture where we went and saw the horses. You know, I got to think about this to try and tell you guys. I just want to kind of give you an idea where things come from for me and how they sort of developed. You get a little better idea of how the outdoor writer works and where the brain works. And the first thing I thought of was a monarch and a road. It was a story I wrote. It's actually the first story experience I have that I remember where I had a critique. It wasn't a really good critique. At least I didn't think it was a very good critique. They had this brilliant idea in the 4th grade where they'd take the kid and set him in the back corner on his desk, and the mom and the teacher would sit up at the teacher's desk and they'd talk about you. So they're talking about me and they're talking about my story. I was really happy about my story about the monarch and the road. And Mrs. Anderson and my mom are laughing until, they're in tears. They're laughing at my story. So, and, I didn't cry. I didn't. And this is why they were starting to laugh, because the moral of the story was about this adventurous little butterfly that really wanted to get out and go do things and be on his own. And well, you know, the moral of the story really was you're supposed to look both ways before you cross the street. The whole story was really inspired by a monarch that I found laying on the side of the road over by the power plant. Poor little dead monarch. But I still remember that story today. And my mom said she thought I had an amazing imagination. Carried on. So I flew the nest from Iowa. We all look pretty good when we take off. And I landed about 3,300 miles away in Alaska. And I went to work at the Fairbanks Daily News Miner, and if you get an idea of that, that was the Tanana the Daily News and the Tanana Miner that joined forces back in the early 1900s. So it was a resource extraction-based community newspaper. The owner was one of the founders of statehood, and the president and manager was a dyed-in-the-wool hunting guide and bush pilot. And they really liked me because, hey, you're going to be hunting. And the first 9.5, 10 years I was there, I was the outdoor writer. That's what I did. I kind of started out in obituaries and stuff like that, like everybody does. But within a year, I was writing about outdoors, writing about hunting, and everything. And what I got from that experience, you know, as big as it was, as big as the things we did, was getting the idea that everything was worth a little closer look. You think big and you see Dall sheep hunting in the Brooks Range, hunting moose, grizzly bear, caribou, bear on Kodiak Island, musk ox on Nunivak Island. But every one of those experiences I went on, something new, different little side story happened that educated people about more than just I went and killed something. Kodiak, I'm still in the book somewhere for having, I think, the first or second recorded note of a great gray owl on Kodiak Island. Because we were laying in our tent and the wind was howling and the fog was there and we were stuck in the tent for 2 days and all we heard was this whoo, whoo, whoo. Like, that owl's driving me nuts. And I mentioned it in the story that I wrote, and Dan Gibson at the University of Alaska Fairbanks called me up and said, tell me about this owl you heard again. Because they're really not supposed to be there. I think there was one sighting prior to that. But you know, just I lived the life, and I'd have more photos of me sharing my experiences with my kids and all that stuff. But you know, really, a lot of it is on negative film and slides. So I still haven't digitized a lot. That's my daughter Sydney on a little trip we took later. I thought these guys might be fun to introduce because I did have a digital shot of them, Bill Tilton and Ron Clark, North American Falconers Association. They're just a couple interesting characters I met, and I made sure I got together with them for a little deal before I left, and got these shots of him, Ron with his, what is it, Gaius? Male gyrfalcon, and Ron with his tertial peregrine, 11 years old, Farinelli and Blue with Ron and Bill. We just had great times with those guys. And, you know, just all the different stuff you run into as a journalist. You get to make friends with people that you just normally wouldn't get to meet. And I had that little sunset shot of Bill and Blue there. I just had to share that because it was fun. They wondered about me, and I almost got fired over this deal. The president wasn't very happy about it because this was I thought it was an interesting outdoor story. It's just kind of the way my mind works, that these two kids lived in Fairbanks, and they're the first organized animal rights group in Alaska. I thought that took a lot of courage to become animal rights guys. Let's go talk to them and see what they think and why they decided to do this. Well, you know, of course, this was seen as giving them a little more ink than they deserved from the president's and a lot of my hunting friends' point of view. And I had old Jim Greiner, who was a guest columnist. He was our bush pilot. He wrote a little anti column down in the right hand corner. But what happened was, and it's unfortunately you can't see from this old clip, it's color photo, the two new animal rights guys in Fairbanks standing in front of their cabin with moose antlers on the outside of the cabin. And the Associated Press loved that photo, and it went national. So that really made everybody happy. But you know, I always told people just, hey, you know, it's all part of what we do. It's all part of it. I don't know if you guys have been reading in the paper. We've had the Wildlife Commission they thought they had some pretty strong controversy over deer hunting seasons lately. Well, that's 2,500 people there for a Board of Game meeting in Fairbanks, Alaska, from all over the country. They were a little upset about wolf control, and I had just an example of one of the fun things I did. We had people there from all over the country, including, you know, PETA and Friends of Animals. And that was the first day I met Priscilla Farrell, who founded Friends of Animals. And she had quite a crew up there with her. There was probably 40 or 50 of them. And I didn't know. I said, you know, it was about 20 below that day, I guess. And they said, just go over and find Priscilla. So I walked into the crowd wearing this. And I'm looking around for Priscilla, and people are looking at me like, who the hell are you? If you see this photo right here is the local protesters from Fairbanks, and they had every fur they could find that they drug out to do their little counter protest across the street. I think there was a half a dozen of them, because protesting really wasn't their thing. But I walked in there, and Priscilla said, "How dare you wear that here to come and talk to us?" And I said, you know what? This is my home, and this is what I wear. These are my clothes, and I'm sorry it offends you, but I'm here to tell your story. So if you'll talk to me, I promise I'm going to be fair, and I'm going to listen to you. And if, you know, days went by, but she and Wayne Pacelli both were in the office later, and they came over and they shook my hand. They thanked me for being fair. They thought it was great. Priscilla, our thing ended up being, because this issue went on and on and on. So I spoke to Priscilla Farrell quite a bit. And our thing was, she was a Labrador owner too. Of course, her labs never got feathers in their mouth. And so I would tease her and say, you ever get, hi Priscilla, hey, that poor Labrador of yours ever get feathers in its mouth? And she'd come back and say, no, but can you tell me the names of the last animals you've murdered? And we just laughed and left it at that, and then went on with business. But it was just a free and fun rapport. It wasn't. I did have a little bit of a problem with when I was managing editor later too. I was the only editor in the history of the News Miner to draw his own protest by firing a columnist. Everybody said he was fired. He was just a popular guy who I changed formats of columns. He'd actually written 3 columns in the past 12 months. So somewhere there's a TV clip of me standing out in a parking lot with 100 protesters and saying, somebody saying, I read Dan every week. So that's a pretty good trick. He only wrote 3 columns in the past 12 months. But it was fun. So I just kind of throw that out there, let you know I was an enemy of the state before being an enemy of the state was cool. On to Oklahoma. Strapped on my big lens and came down here to look around. That's my hero shot right there. Just throw it out for fun. But here I am again. I'm taking photos. I'm in the wild. I'm the hunter on the promo photos out west, running dogs, shooting quail. The pheasants were a lot of fun coming back because Iowa boy in Alaska. I was 24 or 23 years without a pheasant hunt, and that it just felt good to come back and see that. But I shot them, and I shot them. It's always fun to get they're beautiful birds and to see what they do. And I shot some turkeys, and I learned how to talk to the turkeys and play with them. But I also learned how to find them and take photos and get them doing their thing, not just walking through the woods and having fun. And this hen, I never did catch her doing it. But you ever seen a hen turkey pull a sandburr out of her foot? It's the funniest dog you ever see. And she'd walk 2 steps and then she'd pick, walk, pick, just like you or me walking through a bunch of sandburrs. It's fun, just sharing things with folks, from the story about how to make, birdseed cakes and put them in your backyard, and what kind of birds come in sitting in the backyard on that barbed wire fence, the finches and all, and looking at birds around the countryside, the dick thistle singing there right in South Bixby on some pigweed. I think I was with Jim Arterburn when I shot that. But it's just kind of fun to have those pretty bird pictures, Every time, I know it's Audubon, so every time things get a little dry here, I'll just put up a picture of a pretty bird. We'll try and get you going. Another pretty bird, mourning doves. My wife loves the way they sing in the morning. She doesn't like them the same way that whiskey does, or the way that I do. They are good to eat. Look, a pretty bird. They're another pretty bird. I love the cardinals in the backyard. It's fun to see the redbirds. We didn't have those in Alaska, but they always sit how they get a stick in front of their face or something like that. You just have to wait. They'll be good. Birds eat birds too, though. Not just us. It's all that circle of life. It's fun to write about both. This guy hanging out on my back fence. He'd leave piles of feathers for me once in a while just to let me know he was around. The bald eagles. That was a release here locally. A side note, good old Farinelli, the 11-year-old peregrine, only lived to be 12 years old thanks to a bald eagle in Juneau, Alaska. They were out hunting, and Farinelli was chasing a duck, and a bald eagle decided Farinelli looked pretty tasty and took him out. Who knew? Bald eagle take out a peregrine falcon. Ron was crushed after 12 years. Birds are always there, looking, watching. Look, a pretty bird. Bluebirds are great. Great conservation story. I've written a lot about bluebirds. Everybody says, "You're writing about bluebirds again?" That's kind of around the story, around the newsroom. You're writing about bluebirds again? It's just a thing. I wish I'd gotten a better photo on that. I should have got a better high-res photo for the slideshow on this, but you get the idea. Journalism is a lot like wildlife photography, which is a lot like hunting, sitting in a blind in a hold with brush pulled over your head, and you're sitting in the ice-cold water for 3 or 4 hours waiting because those ducks are going to show up sooner or later. Some green-winged teal swim by or whatever. Just fun times, but always educational for folks. Great to write about. Now, Whiskey likes birds. He likes birds in another way. Now, a lot of people, I got a little bit of a complaint about this when we ran it in the paper. They used it at Bid Lake. Well, he said, all you do is pile those ducks up and show people how much stuff you can kill. It's, I feel, I understand what you're saying. It looks like a pile of dead ducks. What I see is my dog that I trained myself, who was sitting there after 4 hours in a hard morning swimming in 38-degree water, and he retrieved 22 ducks, and we didn't lose a single one. Even the shooters that weren't real good, a couple of them sailed off, he swam off, he went out and got them. That was a lot of hard work. If you think each one of those ducks, he's in the blind, it's about 20 of them. Each one's maybe 35, 40 yards through ice-cold water. That's an accomplishment right there. Hero dog. Pretty pictures too are fun. That's the thing about duck hunts. It's always that sunrise, and there's always something to tell people there that inspires them. That gets people out. The best comment I get a lot of times is usually a woman in a grocery store who stops and says, "I know who you are." He says, "I don't," and they say, "I never read the sports pages, but I read your outdoor columns." And it's a great compliment. And then they'll say, "I don't hunt or I don't fish or anything, but I like the stories. I like the pictures." And all of that is just, bringing people outdoors and relating your subject to them, getting them going. It's just, the best thing. As long as we're informal, I'll share my best compliment ever. I was in the Fred Meyer in Fairbanks, which is like the equivalent of our Walmart. And this woman comes up to me, and I'm not going to be too shy about this. She was extremely attractive. And she's walking toward me, and you notice the woman like that, looking right at you. And she stopped and put her hand on my cart, and she goes, "You're Kelly Bostian, aren't you?" And I said, "Well, yes, do I know you?" She says, "No." And then she started to cry, and she hugged me. And, you know, a little bit uncomfortable. There's a sobbing woman holding on to me in the middle of a grocery store. And she backed up and she said, "You know, I just wanted to thank you. You saved my marriage." And what I'd been doing for like 3 years or so, when my youngest, my now oldest, who's 30 years old, was I wrote columns at least once a month about doing something outdoors with her. If it was, she was on my backpack and we were cross country skiing, we were out hunting, I was out hunting ducks, and she was, you know, it was about trying to keep the earphones on so I didn't deafen her, and she's just playing with ducks and pulling their feathers out in the bottom of the blind, or she was painting my truck with mud. Whatever she was doing, she was out with me. And the woman said, "You know, my husband is just, he loves to hunt and he loves to fish, but to him it's going out and drinking with his buddies. And he leaves on Friday night and he comes back on Sunday night, and I just never saw him." He said, "I saved your columns for 2 years and I left them in a manila envelope." I said, "Read these." And then she said, "He changed his ways." And she said, "We're the happiest family there ever was now." So, you know, in Oklahoma, they didn't have snakes in Alaska. I played with them all the time when I was a little kid. When I went to Alaska, the first thing I called the wildlife department, and I told them the first thing I want to do is get close to a grizzly bear. I don't want to be afraid of bears if I'm going to be out all the time. So I need to get up close and personal with a bear. And they arranged that. Within a year, I was in a bear den fishing out black bears, little black bears, so they could collar them and do a study, and flying around getting airsick on a Piper Cub while they darted a grizzly in the Alaska range and got to go down and move him. You know, they do that immobilizing dart. So the bear is technically awake, but they're sort of paralyzed, and, you know, to grab onto that big paw and hold it up, and he's, you know, his eyes looking at you. He just can't do anything about it. And you know, you learn about it. So here I got up close and caught as many snakes as I could get, and going out and running around and playing with rattlesnakes. Not playing, you never play with a rattlesnake, but I've met this guy, Tim Fitzer, and he's crazy. He's got 40 acres where Whiskey and I train and play all the time, and he loves to have us out there. He's, "Bostian, you got to know, oh man," he called me 2 days ago. He says, "Man, you got to come do a story. This is going to be great." And he's got to have another. I did a video with him just simply because he handles the snakes with some respect. He catches them, but then he lets them go in the fall. And he's always careful about how he handles them. He's always trying to learn more about the snakes and what they do. And he's always trying to, it's hilarious because he's got the worst accent ever, and he tries to pronounce Latin. And, but now he's figured out, he's working with a company to design better bags for him and better handles for him. Because he said, I was talking to those guys, Bostian, and you can hold that snake, and if you got a little bit too much of a print, you can break a couple of them ribs, and that'll shorten their life. He said, you can't be doing that. So he's got ideas about how he's going to do all these things. And they're making a TV show. It's supposed to be on the Outdoor Channel, so watch for a story about Tim the Wild Man. They're going to call it Wild Tales, and he'll be out in the woods grabbing everything with a tail, from snakes to alligators to whatever else. It's just kind of funny how stories come along. You meet people or you go out and you do things. I was out west hunting quail, with my buddy Randy Billington, and of course my other bird lover, that's Whiskey. Whiskey was a quail dog. He comes from quail stock. And I'm out there, and I decide to call Sue Selman, and Sue tells me about the area over by her place in the Gypsum Hills over by the Selman Bat Caves, and they're going to be building a power line through there. I'm like, what? They're going to do what now? So I'm out on a quail hunt. This ends up being a story about a power line. Suddenly I'm back home learning about the wind industry. all I wanted to do was go walk through the western with wilds with my dog and shoot some quail. But we learned about these incredible sinkholes, write a story on that. And, long story short, I think it was within a year I was standing out here in Creek County with Gled and Gansco and going to meetings in Bixby, and the wind catcher power line was about to be a thing of the past, and they got it to stop because they really tried to do something impossible, to build a 350-mile wind line, power line across Oklahoma in the space of a couple of years. So it just stories happen like that. That's how it comes about. Speaking of quail, I couldn't bring up quail and not talk about this incredible thing they're doing at Sutton. Does everybody know about that? The Sutton Aviation Center with the masked bobwhites. A little story about how they've learned to that the male bobwhite or the male masked bobwhite will adopt the chicks, and then they can transplant them in the wilds as a covey, and then they get better survival rates that way. And of course, everybody knows Don Wolf, and messing with those masked bobwhites. Just incredible stuff that happens right here in Oklahoma. And I tell people about this all the time, and they're just astounded that it happens. At least we got it in the paper. I can tell them to Google it and learn more. Just this week, this Sunday, wrote about Wade Free and our new upland biologist, Tel Judkins, and their stories of what they're doing, studying diseases and bobwhite. And it's interesting to sit down with these guys because Wade's talking about hunting, and he keeps a hunting journal going back to the 80s, but the biology behind it and the thought behind how all this works and what he observes in quail compared to ground nesting birds and all of the birds across North America and around the world that we're learning are disappearing is fascinating. And what these guys what really opened my eyes with Tel is a young guy looking at all this science that he's going to pull in from the University of Georgia. They are necropsying. They're taking 100 to 200 birds a year and sending them out. Some are getting very detailed necropsies where they can see, 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, this bird was exposed to what's the with the mosquitoes and the blackbird. Anyway, they exposed. Yes, thank you. And what they've been exposed to, anything they've had. I mean, it's very, very detailed stuff. And he says, I don't really expect anything to come of it. And that really surprised me. He said, you're spending all this money, we're doing all this study, and you don't expect anything to come of it. No, not really. But it's a rule out. And it also gives me something that it's not just me saying, I don't think it's like this. I don't think it's disease that's knocking off the quail, because here's why. We studied this, and here's what we have found. What he's convinced it is, and what everybody's been saying for years, is habitat and weather. And that's what we wrote about this week. It was kind of interesting, these transmitters, these little transmitters they were putting on the quail. He didn't have the numbers to tell me how much it was costing, but these aren't cheap little transmitters, but they work really well. And the detail they can pull from these things that get readings every time a satellite passes over, instead of, you remember the stories you see biologists out with the antenna walking around in the field trying to find the quail. Well, you're out there doing that and you're busting through the woods, and the quail is, what are you doing? It's not over yet. Go place. Place. No, he doesn't need to go outside. He's good. He can sit in the duck blind for 4 hours and not have to do that. Lay down. Yeah. He told me about the quail that crossed the road. And he said, we were watching this thing on the map, and it's crossing the road every day, several times. That bird's going to get hit on the road. Sure enough, one day, there's the transmitter sitting in the road. So they go back to recover the transmitter, and where is it? 150 yards off the road in a pile of feathers. He said, in the old days, we would have gone and said, that's a predator kill right there. So that kind of detailed information helps them sort them things out. And he says, we all talk about the habitat, and if you build it, they will come. And that's true to an extent, but how well do they come? Do they come in to the field and they're not the Yankees, but maybe they're the Detroit Tigers, and they're just pretty much between home plate and first base, and they don't get any further than that. What are they actually able to use? What's in between there? And they're doing it's just incredible stuff that they can learn from. There's always the frustrations that we have with how we have impacted our landscape in good ways and not good ways, and some ways that are good and just have their downsides. You can be in downtown Tulsa and see incredible striped bass running up the river, and these guys out here catching them to spawn and create hybrid striped bass for those fantastic fisheries, and then the next day you come back and it's the dead zone. Shut it off, let her die. Incredible stories just pop up and hit you in the face. One thing I'll say real quick about my dad. We were sitting in the dining room looking out over our acreage one day after college. It was before it was after I worked in Texas. I was going to move to Alaska, and so the outdoor rider dream was coming true. Every dad's greatest hope is his son will become a journalist. And he said, well, now if you're going to write stories, you know what you really ought to write about? You really ought to write about water. Dad was a plumber. I grew up in the plumbing and heating business. I went my first call to the city pool that you saw on that slide back there when I was 12 years old on my bicycle. Fixed the toilet. It was running. But Dad was, for years, this was about the first hog confinement that turned up there about maybe 1979, 78. And he'd put in the plumbing for that. And for years, he worked all those rural areas, and he worked on people to help them purify their water, doing water softeners. And the old thing was usually back, it was just, Joe needs a water softener. Put in a water softener, pour in the salt, soften the water, everything's good. Well, now he's coming along and he's saying these test results aren't making sense. I can't purify this water. What kind of filters do I need to buy? And he told me water is going to be a huge issue. Of course, that went, yeah, Dad, I'm going to go to Alaska and write about hunting moose and caribou, stuff like that. Well, Dad was right. And here I am 35 years later, and it seems like a week doesn't go by anymore that some water issue hasn't come up. People are calling me now from Pawnee and Barnsdall talking about water problems. Now that I write about it, they call me and say, hey, what do you know about this? And I usually don't know much, but I go try and find out what I can find. This is Dave Benham in Saline Creek, where he grew up, talking about how the creek has changed and how this little piece of it is pretty much still how he remembers, except for the gravel bars and the erosion on the other side. And, a few miles downstream, the Corps and the Department of Mines didn't mind having a gravel pit and turn it into a mud hole in a slow stream. So it's just, it's amazing what you run into. I spent a better part of a year and a half now going to chicken house meetings. I love that photo. Everybody sees that piece of paper on the door. It says chicken house meeting, but I really like the sticker that was actually in the thing that says breathe easy. But yeah, next thing I know, I'm attending chicken house meetings, and I'm learning about agriculture issues and folks who are just trying to scratch by and make a living, and big ag and small farmers. And what about the water? Why is this spring that is run full for the past 20 years now at a third of the volume that it used to be? Why? I don't know. Nobody knows. They're trying to find out. This little shot here needs smell-o-vision. That's a litter truck that's heaped full of chicken manure and litter from the chicken house. There's no cover over it, and that road you really can't see from the right photo, but it's like a washboard all the way down, and it's a real pleasure to follow one of those trucks down the road, as most Oklahomans know. But living right next to it's even something different. It's just it's all well and good, and it's the economy, and it's growing, and until there's 300,000 chickens in your front yard, you just meet interesting people. Meanwhile, I just keep putting it out there and showing people pictures of insects. And the funny thing is, you kind of get into identifying stuff. Yeah, everybody in this room loves to look at birds and identify birds and learn about the different birds. I'm writing from the perspective, is that a damselfly or a dragonfly? People don't, yeah, people, of course it is. But people don't know that stuff. Is it a damselfly or is that a dragonfly? It's pretty. Does it bite? You know, some people are afraid of skippers. You know, does an assassin bug kill you? Do soldier beetles attack? Are they dangerous? I don't know, but I'm writing about this thing, and then this guy calls me up and says, hey, you put all these photos about bugs in the paper. I don't have any insects anymore. I don't have any birds anymore. They're all dropping off. Yeah, I don't know if oh gosh, I forgot his name now. Mark Chrisman, up in Glencoe. I got to follow up with him and see if things have changed after all the years of big rains. But he was pretty sure he was seeing Armageddon. We didn't find any proof of it, but everybody seemed, well, not everybody, but a lot of people have those stories about used to be hornets here, used to be wasps here, used to be bugs here, always used to be the flycatchers over in here, and the field is still the same field that it used to be, and why aren't there flycatchers now? I don't understand this. Why is that happening? And I just keep taking pictures of bugs, and I figured out that there was such thing as a brown-belted bumblebee this year. I didn't know. I just thought every bumblebee was a bumblebee. But we got a couple of different species of bumblebees here in Oklahoma. That's the large and the small of it. Of course, the tall grass prairie is out there. You can't talk about outdoors in Oklahoma without talking about the prairie and the bison. The bison really, if you think about it, is a small thing compared to the wide expanse of the prairie. He's just a little guy out there trying to make a living. And they saw their sunset. Everybody knows how it came back. I loved looking at the bison, but the next thing I knew when I was up at the Sawgrass was I was talking to a couple of guys, somebody in here knows them, and talking to Bob and Carrie about some really small critters, microbes under the soil killed by salt. We're talking about 100-year-old scars in the landscape left over from oil production, from produced water that still spills out on the ground. It's just, you know, the temptation is to think it's just salt water, right? It's just salt water. Well, the salt kills the microbes, and the microbes fall apart, and the vegetation dies off, and then you have erosion. And erosion is a hard thing to stop. That's the prairie. Now, there has to be some comic relief in here, and actually there has to be a tip. So if you're at a bird meeting, I mean, any kind of time you talk to folks, you want to pass along something they can use. So that's what this slide is about. And you know, everybody knows who that guy is. I guess he gets in the next program, which I would have rather talked about that than talk about myself. Come to think of it, but if you're a really serious birder, it's all about the pinky. Isn't that right? I mean, even if you're young, you picked up this thing and you learn. So get this down. If you want to know your birds, do this. I got to throw that in there just because, you know, that's my dog. That's Whiskey, and he loves birds too. And he loves deer. We learned how to track deer this year. Help hunters recover their deer. Conservation. They shoot a deer and they don't put a tag on it. It means they can shoot another one if they're not completely ethical. Go get them. Where was I? Where at the airport? Where was I? The Martins. Everybody in this group knows about the Martins and the airport and writing about how that just became such an interesting issue. But how much did Tulsa learn about martins because they decided to move out to the airport? Downtown, it was just kind of like, oh, those things are such a nuisance. Out at the airport, it was like a thing. Or why do they do that? Why are they moving out there? I got so many more questions about martins. They're just fun to look at. They're neat to look at. It's incredible when they join up like that and get ready to migrate, and you figure out where they're going to go. And all kinds of connections kind of come to happen when you get onto a story about birds, this certain kind of bird. So this thing kind of went from martins to monarchs and milkweed and eaters of milkweed and protectors of milkweed. There she is right there in the crowd. So I met Anita, and she was incredible, raises incredible numbers of butterflies, and I got to know her through the monarchs and all that kind of stuff, and got some great stories about that, but then learned she has this stuff going on too, right in her backyard. Purple martins, growing them right there in the backyard, banding them, and getting together with Tim Manigan of Kansas, banding them as they fly all the way to Brazil and back. And people love that story. Be careful when you Google Brazil. You got interesting pictures of women in bikinis. The stories though in this, and one of the things I want to leave people with is the stories happen not because I'm out there necessarily searching for them. It's just these connections happen, and it's people like Anita and Tim and folks in this room who make the phone call or speak up and say, hey, here's something you ought to look into. This is interesting. Or, you watch something, somebody says, hey, did you hear about this random couple from Atlanta, Georgia come through town on their big year, and they're trying to find a Lapland longspur because this particular longspur happens to hang out in the Tulsa area in the wintertime, and I brought it to the editor, and he said, what in the hell is a longspur? And that creates a story. And I got a dog that loves birds too. Birds make my dog happy, and that's kind of where I'm going to be summarizing this thing. If you just kind of find your own balance. We're all born with a sense of balance. You find it. You just discover your own sense of it. No two birds are going to hit that branch and balance the same way, but they're going to get there. They're going to sit up. And you embrace things that might be a little bit scary, or things that are fascinating, explosive, or maybe things that feel hopeless. But just show people. You look at close and show people the smallest things, the biggest things, and those things you might take for granted every day. Why are those leaves turning red? What makes that happen? Anybody can tell those stories, even if you're a phony conservationist like me. Definitely a phony. Oh, well, we all have those days. Might leave us feeling a little bit blue. Hope I'm not leaving you that way, because there's always going to be a brighter day ahead. That's the same bird, by the way. You find your sure footing, you get on to the next thing, you learn, you get outdoors, and do more, and I'll leave you right there. Thanks, all. Thank you.